Writing a 5-paragraph essay is something that every writer needs to know how to do, and every student is a writer. So it's important that you as a student and a learner know exactly how to write an effective 5-paragraph essay. And I'm going to help you remember the parts of a 5-paragraph essay by helping you learn those parts in an interesting way by making a bracelet or a keychain that has those parts to it. Every 5-paragraph essay has the first paragraph as an introduction with the hook and context and thesis, then 3 body paragraphs that have your 3 main points with illustrations and explanations, and then ending with a 5th paragraph that is your conclusion, where you review your main points and end with a strong statement that circles back to the beginning. So now I'll show you the weave that you'll use in your bracelet before we get started. So you start with 4 pieces of string and you make a number 4 here, and then you put that straight part behind and through the circle part and pull tight, and then you make a backwards 4 next and put that straight part behind and through the circle part and pull that tight, and you'll alternate back and forth, left and right, for the entire weave, and it'll look something like this. But you got to remember that when you make a 5-paragraph essay of any type, you need to start with a hook. That you need to give your readers something to hang on to so that they're hanging there with you, reading through it. If you don't, they're not going to stick with you. Next, you need to give them some firm understanding. So we're going to make a knot here to help them understand what it is you're going to talk about or write about. They need that firm understanding in order to understand where you're going. So we're making a knot, give it some firmness. Now, once we hook them and we've given them something firm to keep them right there, then we need to tell them where we're going with this. We need to give them our thesis, which is 3 main points. And just as you have seen on our pie recipe for paragraphs, the main points, or the points, are always illustrated in blue. And for a 5-paragraph essay, you're going to have 3 main points. Now you can use a 5-paragraph essay with more points or fewer points and still have the same basic format. But generally, we say a 5-paragraph essay is your introduction, which you've got right here, your hook, your context, and now with your thesis of your 3 main points, 3 body paragraphs, which include those 3 main points, and then your conclusion paragraph. Those are the 5 paragraphs. But if you have more points, you might have a 6-paragraph essay, 7-paragraph essay, maybe you have fewer points, maybe you have a 4-paragraph essay. But the concept behind it is still the same. Okay, we have our first paragraph here. We have our hook, we have our context that firms up your reader's understanding of what you're talking about, and then your 3 main points in your thesis. Now we transition to your first body paragraph. And when we transition, just like in our pie recipe for paragraphs, we're going to use pink to help us remember to use transitions. So we are going to transition to our first body paragraph. And this transition might be first, might be, for example, now we need our first main point. This first main point here is going to show up in our first body paragraph, which is technically your 2nd paragraph. So we're going to put on first main point, just like this. Okay, we've got our first main point. Now, how are we going to prove that point? We need to show. We're telling them what the first main point is. Now we need to show them what it means. So we're going to transition from our first main point into an illustration. And an illustration could be a statistic, it could be a definition, it could be a comparison, it could be a funny story, it could be a serious story, but it is a showing of your first main point. And so we're going to put on our yellow, which again in our pie recipe for paragraphs, our illustrations are always yellow. So now we have our first illustration to show our first main point. And then we need to explain, and again in our pie recipe for paragraphs, green is the explanation. So we explain how that illustration proves our point. And in order to explain, you'll be using something like which proves that, this shows that, which is evidence that, and other things that will help you explain the connection between the illustration and the point. And generally, you can't prove a point with just one illustration, and so you'll need to add and transition to another. I'm going to switch to pink here. And we will transition to a new illustration. So we'll get our transition done here. And then we'll use another illustration, which again, it might be a comparison, it might be a contrast, it might be a definition, it could be an extended example, it could be a list of examples, it could be a quote, a statistic, some sort of fact that you have discovered. So we have that illustration, and then we again explain with the green, explain how that illustration proves that main point. So we can work as long as we need to in order to explain how that illustration proves that point. And if we've proved it with those two illustrations, we can move on, transition to our second body paragraph, which is our second main point. So we will transition using our pink here. And you have to be intentional with your transitions. Those are cues for your readers that you are moving to some other item. It might be a cue that you're adding more of the same. It might be a cue that you're moving to a new paragraph, a new idea. But you need to be intentional with those. And we are moving to a new main point. So we transition then to our illustration, which will show the point that we are telling. So we'll put on a new illustration. Again, that might be a fact, a statistic, a quote, something to show your readers what you mean about that main point. And explain how that main point is proven by that illustration. Sometimes you can use two illustrations in a row and combine your explanation. You might even use three illustrations and then in the end explain what that means. But you'll always need to explain how that illustration shows or proves your point. Intentionally, we need to transition to another point. That transition might be in addition. For example, another example is furthermore. Types of transitions like that cue your reader that you're moving to something else or continuing on in the same manner. Even the word also is a transition word that you use intentionally to cue your reader. Then we explain how that point is proven by that illustration, how that illustration shows what you mean by that point. And words and phrases like this shows that, which proves that, are good to use here. And if we have explained enough to where we feel we've proven our point, then we can transition, use our pink again intentionally. We use our transition to move to a new paragraph. Your third main point. And so you do the same thing with your third main point as you did your first and second main points, with your point, your illustration, and your explanation. Transition here, we've had our 1, 2, 3 main points that we told the reader up in our introduction paragraph and our thesis that we were going to talk about. We've talked about them, shown them, explained them. Now we're transitioning to our last paragraph, which is our conclusion paragraph. So you can transition with in conclusion, as a result, in the end. And our conclusion paragraph will always summarize our 3 main points and reiterate that thesis so we can remind our readers of what they learned from reading our essay. And you won't want to just simply restate them. You'll want to summarize them. Maybe have a sentence or two for each main point, summarizing them and reiterating that thesis. And then you'll want to tie it up with a real strong statement at the end. Tie it up so that they know exactly what it is you wanted them to know. End with something strong. And then it's always great to bring it full circle by mentioning something that you had in your introduction. Brings it full circle. And that's how you make your 5-paragraph essay.